Good morning. We are on Memches Amud Aleph 48a, a little below the middle of the page. The line begins with the big bold letters Mas Nisan, Mem Saf Nun Yud and apostrophe, Nun Yud and apostrophe. Below the wide lines, three or four lines down from the wide line, the first word is big bold letters Memches Amud Aleph. So it's 48a, back a page. There it is, yeah. See it?
Okay. Yeah, the Mishnah.
That's it, exactly, the Mishnah.
Yeah.
So you found it, Moshe? Yeah. Okay, so the Mishnah have begun already the process of discussing changes that happen over time. And specifically, for the most part, actually, the degeneration of society. And the last thing we discussed was Yochanan Kohen Gadol in the Hashmonayic period, after the Hellenizers, who, for at least for most of his life, spent his time trying to uphold Jewish practice, but in that came some compromise in some ways, stopping certain practices that were accepted earlier, but in an effort to centralize Jewish practice around proper observance and understanding. That was his objective, even though it came at some compromise, like they stopped saying the pasuk, which implicates they're waking up God. They stopped striking the strikers, striking the animals, and so on. Now the Gemara gives other such examples. And what's interesting, I don't have an answer to this, but what's interesting is that the Gemara jumps around, historically speaking. It's not in chronological order. Like earlier we were discussing, there was one thing that Yochanan ben Zakkai ended, which is the end of the Second Temple period. What was that? There was something he stopped. What was it with Yochanan ben Zakkai?
Had to do with the tithing?
No, that was wasn't that Yochanan Kohen Gadol?
Yeah.
Let's go back to the Mishnah for 1 second. He ended the Sotah, maybe? Oh, yeah, here. Yeah, he stopped. Yeah, Yochanan ben Zakkai ended the Sotah water. Then the Gemara backs up to Yosef ben Yehuda and Yosef ben Yehuda, when the Eshkolos, the clusters, people had all kinds of Torah stopped. And we had Yochanan ben Zakkai. Okay, Yochanan ben Zakkai is a similar. I'm sorry, Yochanan Kohen Gadol. It's a similar time to Yosef ben Yehuda and Yosef ben Yehuda, maybe a little before, a little after, but somewhere.
Ben Zakkai fit in the time.
End of the Second Temple period. He's there during the destruction. He's alive during the destruction. So we went to there and we went back. And now the Gemara also jumps around, because the Gemara is going to identify first something that stops at the time when the Sanhedrin stopped, which is somewhere toward the, sorry? I'm just going to use,
like a chart or something.
Okay, so the names you don't have to remember, but I'm just going to put the temple periods.
Okay.
Right? So you had the Sotah, which ends at the end of the Second Temple period. You had the changes described yesterday and the day before about the Meiser and about the strikers and the waker-uppers. That ends somewhere in the middle of the Second Temple period.
Right, makes sense.
Which is a bit earlier. So that's the middle of Hanukkah time, Hashmonayic time, right after Hanukkah.
Right.
So that's the middle of the Second Temple period. Now the Gemara is going to jump to something which ended when Sanhedrin ended, which is later, towards the end of the Second Temple period. And then the Gemara is going to go back to the earlier prophets, which is sometime end of the First Temple period. And then the Gemara is going to jump back to the end of the Second Temple period. And so I'm not really sure why it is in this particular order, because it doesn't seem to be chronological. And maybe it's I'm sure the order is relevant, and I'm sure it has to do with the content rather than the chronology. I just don't know what that is. But I'm sure the content somehow links one to the next. Sotah was put first, and Eglah Rufa was put first, because that's our current discussion.
Right.
But then the things that follow, you would imagine would go chronologically if it's a historical document. But as with most of Torah, it's not history per se as much as it is the history of morality.
It's content.
It's right. So history is relevant to the lessons it teaches. And maybe in that regard, there's a specific formulation to the order. I'm certain, but I don't have the answers. I'm just putting that out there. Okay, so first statement. I'm going to read through the Mishnah, and then we'll discuss something that I wanted to share with you, something interesting that's related. The Mishnah reads, Mishabot la Sanhedrin. From the time the Sanhedrin ended, dissolved. So, to the best of my knowledge, the Sanhedrin continued, certainly through the Second Temple period, but I believe even after. Let's ask Google, when did Sanhedrin end? Yeah, that's right. The Great Sanhedrin ceased to exist according to Britannica at Jerusalem after that disastrous rebellion against Rome in AD 66, 70. The Second Temple. After the Second Temple. The last universally binding decision of the Great Sanhedrin appeared 358 CE, when the Hebrew calendar was established. This is according to Wikipedia, the Great Sanhedrin was finally disbanded in 425 CE after continued persecution by the Eastern Roman Empire.
Wasn't the Second Temple
Completely different.
70 AD?
Well, because this depends what you mean by Sanhedrin. In theory, they had a centralized government in Babylonia too, but I believe it means end of the Second Temple period.
That wasn't the temple destroyed at 70 AD?
Right, 70. So it's
You
around.
mentioned
No,
CE is way before.
CE is Common Era,
Oh, Common Era.
and so is AD.
Oh, Common Era. I was thinking
AD is
before
also
Common
after.
Era.
That would be BCE.
BCE. I thought you said BCE.
AD and CE are the same thing.
No.
But here, Britannica and Wikipedia are giving different things, and I think they mean different
No, I just heard
types of
BCE.
Sanhedrin.
I don't know why.
Anyway, the Sanhedrin essentially ended after the Second Temple period. Okay, or somewhere after the Second Temple period. 70, the year 70,
okay.
right? The year 70 is destruction.
Okay.
Okay, so Misha Batla Sanhedrin, when the Sanhedrin dissolved, Batal Hashir Mi Beis Hamishtais, song was nullified in drinking houses. Song. It became forbidden to sit around, drink wine, and listen to music. It became forbidden.
Well, prior to that, it was okay.
Yep, apparently. Yeah, there's something, and we're going to see it's associated with the destruction of the temple as well, right? Which is why I'm understanding the Sanhedrin here is associated with the end of the temple. And indeed, there still remains a halachic prohibition against music. We'll discuss more about that in a minute. But there does against music and song. And on the basic level, it's because there's no longer Jewish Torah leadership, and specifically lack of temple, and even more specifically lack of Sanhedrin. So we have no joy. On its most basic level, we'll discuss a little bit more what that might mean as the Gemara gets into, but this is on the basic level. And this remains a halachic truth. We mourn the destruction of the temple. When we have a wedding, we break a glass, indicating that our celebration is incomplete because we don't have a temple. That's the reason. That's why we break a glass, we break a plate. That's per the custom. We have other such customs as well. A person builds a home, not if you buy one, but if you build one from scratch. One is to leave a certain portion of the wall, unplastered, indicating my home is incomplete until God's home is complete. Till today. I remember my great-grandparents' home, they had it, they built their home from scratch. And when you walk into the house, in the foyer room, on top of the door, which goes into the entrance to the house, there's a big open spot that was just brick, unplastered. And other such laws that indicate that our life as a whole is incomplete because we lack the redemption, we lack divine revelation, we lack Sanhedrin, we lack temple. And this is halacha, no music. Again, more details to come. Okay. So Shenemar, as the verse reads, Bashir lo yishtu yayin. The verse reads, this verse comes from Isaiah, the song, they shall not drink wine. And thus, in the company of wine drinking, no music, because there's this temple, because of destruction. And here the Mishnah goes on to say, now again, this is end of the second temple period. Now the Gemara backs up way before to the end of the first temple period, which says, when the early prophets passed, the first prophets, Batlu Urim V'Tumim, the Urim V'Tumim ceased to work. So this is the early prophets. So this is sometime in the middle of the first temple period. And the early prophets, I believe it's the middle of the first temple period. Rashi doesn't make a comment. The Gemara will discuss this, so we'll reserve comment from that. But essentially, the Urim V'Tumim stopped. The Urim V'Tumim, of course, is the Kohen Gadol's breastplate, which would miraculously light up in response to questions that were posed to it. So that came along with the prophecy. In other words, the same divine revelation that was accessible to these prophets is that same divine revelation that made the Urim V'Tumim respond. And when they passed, and that revelation is no longer there, not as the Urim V'Tumim operate. The Gemara will discuss that more. Okay, Mishachara Beis Hamikdash, when the Beis Hamikdash destroyed, Batal Hashamir, the Shamir worm stopped when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed.
First one?
I believe it means the first one. I don't think it means the second one. Maybe it means the second one, but I believe it means the first one. I think.
Did they have the worm for the second one?
I don't think so. So I'm saying I don't think they did.
So yeah.
Certainly Herod didn't. I you know what, I'm not sure actually. Good question. Because then the Gemara would be jumping really back now and then back and forth. Because the Gemara does go back to the second temple. So maybe does this mean the second temple? But let's wait for the Gemara's comment, maybe. Okay. Likewise, Neifes Tzofim and sweetness of honeycombs also ended with the destruction of the second temple. This is a reference to Torah learning, as we'll see in the Gemara. Upasku Anshia Monom Yisrael, and men of real faith stopped amongst Israel. That is to say, people who have zero stress because they have complete and full trust that Hashem provides always. Meaning, not as it would be for most of us, say, that instinctually we stress. And then because we learn a little Torah, we meditate a little and calm ourselves down and say, hey, Hashem runs the world, why are you stressing? These people instinctually didn't stress. Which almost sounds like non-human, right? The human condition is distress. And then we use our meditative capacity and our faith to say, no, calm down. But these were people who instinctively were of faith and therefore no stress. Shenemar, as the verse reads, Hoshia Hashem, God save us. Why should you save us? Ki gomar chassid. Because the chassidim, the chassid, the real pious one, there's no more of them. In other words, we're saying to Hashem, you got to help us out here because we don't have that kind of strong faith like they used to have. Okay. Now the next statement is definitely talking about the second temple period because of the people mentioned. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, hey, Rabbi Yeshua testified. Rabbi Yeshua was only alive during the second temple period. So this must be the destruction of the second temple. So Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel tells us that Rabbi Yeshua said, Miyoim shechara beis hamikdash, the day the temple was destroyed. Ein yoim she'ein bo klala. There's no day free of curse. Every day's got some curse. V'layard hatala bracha. Dew no longer falls for blessing. V'nitel tam haperes. The taste of fruit is gone. You don't know what good tasting fruit is like because you weren't there when the temple stood. Rabbi Yossi added, Af nitel shumon haperes. Fat of fruit, the real lusciousness of the fruits, gone. Or the crop, say. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said, Hatara, the lack of purity, notla esatam v'sareach. The lack of purity, which, although not explicitly stated, but I believe it means with the destruction of the temple, there no longer is the need to be scrupulous about ritual purity, as most of us here are not. So with that was taken taste and smell. And hamaisris, lack of observance of the tithes, not lo shumana dagon, remove the fat of the grain. You no longer have luscious, full grain. And the sages say, haznus vakshofim kilu asakol, promiscuity and witchcraft destroyed everything. And Mishnah, in and of itself, is very powerful. And we'll get to more commentary from the Gemara, but I just want to say two things. On the first item, which is that the prophecy ended and the order of Tumim stopped, the Gemara will discuss more. And the same thing with the worm, the shamir worm. You know what the shamir worm is, right? That worm that would cut through stone and help King Solomon build the first temple. A miraculous sort of entity, a worm that would cut through stone.
They didn't want to use the iron on the stones, right?
That's right.
Because it's bad.
Correct.
The stones.
Right. So it's
Hewn from
iron. You'll have to wait for the Gemara to see if it's first or second temple period. I don't remember. But anyway, but on that note, I would say this: that as we've discussed this before, but as divine revelation decreases in the world, so does, or it's not just divine revelation, it's a world in which spirituality and physicality are much more in sync. Today, our physical reality is a reflection and a byproduct of the spiritual reality, but we don't see that link. We don't see that link. Every Pesach, the revelation of Pesach shines in this world. Every Shabbos, the revelation of Shabbos shines in this world. We just don't experience it. They're detached from that reality. And in temple times, they were attached to that reality. And therefore, positive and negative spiritual forces were much more acutely felt and aware.
Is it because we're outside of Eretz Yisrael?
It's outside of Eretz Yisrael, and specifically the lack of temple. You can be geographically in Eretz Yisrael and still distant from Eretz Yisrael.
I remember you mentioned in Tanya that it was the alignment of.
That's correct. And Gersa Tshuva, that we're discussing this.
During temple times was more direct, cause and effect were more.
That's correct, which is why
linked. But when Klippa came into the picture,
that's right.
You have forces that are not.
That's right. Today, every time a person does a mitzvah, that's right. Every time you do a mitzvah, you're siphoning energy from holiness. Person does a sin, he's siphoning energy from the negative side. You're deriving your life source from negative energy versus deriving your life source from holy energy. Literally, your lifeline, which trickled down from Hashem. There's different pathways it can make it to you. Make it through the pathway of holiness if I'm engaged in mitzvah, or it can make it through the pathway of negativity if I'm engaged in negativity. But that experience, to me, I don't feel a difference in my lifeline, the spiritual flow of life into me, whether I'm doing a mitzvah or not. I still feel the same life. And temple times, they really felt it. And therefore, if a person engaged in klipa, negative behavior enough, say he ate on Yom Kippur, God forbid, he would die prematurely because his lifeline is cut off.
Right.
But today, even our spiritual life is diluted and concealed. So we no longer have that direct link between physical and spiritual. This explains why people were attracted to idol worship at the time. Because the negative spiritual energy was just as enticing as the positive spiritual energy. Right? So that's the first comment. And the Gemara is kind of commenting on that the Sanhedrin end, the prophets end, so the Order of Tumim end, so the Shamir end. That's comment number one. Comment number two is on the issue of lack of taste in the fruit, lack of fat in the grain. There's two ways of thinking about that. One is quite literally, God's blessings no longer shine in this world, and therefore fruits are not as sweet as they used to be. And another way of thinking about this is perhaps it's like when a person is in a, God forbid, depressed state, they can't appreciate the flavors of the food they're eating. Not because their taste buds don't sense it. Their taste buds sense it, but you're not tasting the fruit because your mind is preoccupied by that negativity. And that's perhaps the Gemara's comment here. Every day brings a curse. In other words, the temple is missing. There's this massive void in their lives. And therefore, there's a certain lack of taste.
Like a dullness.
There's a dullness in our enjoyment of this world because our center of life is missing. Conversely, the sages say it's not the lack of temple that ruins everything. It's promiscuity and witchcraft here. Now it's this hour chasing all this selfish hedonism that destroys everything, and you can no longer enjoy anything because it's just selfish pursuit of hedonism. So that's on the Mishnah.
It's like indulgent in the forbidden.
Yeah, that's right. That's correct. Just hedonistic indulgence destroys all. Kilu asakol destroys everything. Destroys enjoyment, destroys meaning, destroys everything, destroys families. Everything comes apart when there's hedonistic, nihilistic, just consumption of pleasure. Let's some comment on that. Now, the Gemara, which we'll get to tomorrow, will go through more details about this issue with the song. But before, I want to do a kind of introduction, if we have a few minutes now, to this idea of song, right? Because we mentioned it's the first statement here that from when the Sanhedrin ends, no longer song in the houses of drinking, no more that kind of, which, as I mentioned, which remains a prohibition of no wine, no song, no music. One's not supposed to listen to music.
That
now
by itself, or only when accompanied with wine?
Okay, so the Mishnah says accompanied with wine, but we're going to, and the Gemara is going to give more details about that, when it's permitted and when it's not permitted. That's kind of the introduction I want to make here. And now, for many generations, this was the going standard. As per these Mishnahs and others like it, Jewish life is meant to be depressed. We're lacking the temple, we're lacking leadership, we're lacking the light and life of our lives, and therefore we ought to be in a state of subdued, borderline depression. Cry over the temple,
Like
sadness. We're in perpetual mourning. And Kabbalah, the reintroduction of Kabbalah into Jewish life, changed that. So those communities that engaged in the study of Kabbalah, not just as an academic, because for a long time everybody did that, but as a way of life, they reintroduced song into Judaism. And you see this in two communities mostly, the Sephardic community and the Hasidic community, both of which were engaged in this pursuit and study of Kabbalah as part of their Jewish life. And they brought song back to prayer. Song, dancing, joy. This is a big part of the opposition to those who opposed the Hasidic movement in Europe, where you had people who were not inclined to Kabbalistic way of living. Some of the pushback was, what is this frivolity all about? Dancing in your prayers. Your prayers are meant to be subdued, crying, the temple's destroyed. We're in exile. What's this dancing all about? This is a big claim, citing to Mishnahs like these, which, of course, as we'll learn tomorrow, the Gemara puts limitations. The Gemara explains when it's yes, when no, why yes, why no. And essentially, it's something like this. And this is this idea that the song ends in the houses of drinking. The issue with music, or the issue with song, is, first of all, we have to understand that music and song goes to a very, very deep place within the person in two directions, from outward in and from inward outward. The person who is so inclined will express a deep part of themselves in music, in art in general, but specifically music, better than they can in words. In words, you explain what you're thinking or what you're feeling. In music, you express what you're thinking and feeling. It's much deeper. Right? And then the same thing with outward, inward. Listening to music, because it comes from such a deep place of the person who composed that music, it can drag you into a place. Right? From outward in, music can take you to a certain place on a very deep level, which is why one has to be very careful as to the music they listen to. What's the message being conveyed? Who is writing it? What's the intent? It's from a holy source, from God forbid, a not holy source, because it takes a person to on a very deep level, drags a person to a certain place. Especially with as children grow up, it's important that music be wholesome. So to that end, and this is going to become, I think, what the Gemara is going to do in saying what's permitted and what's not permitted. Directionless music, that's the prohibition. Directionless music. Music in the wine drinking, just drinking for drinking and music for music. Music, as we're going to learn, that is directional. There's a specific intent. I want to get somewhere. For the Gemara gives an example of people who work that use music as a way of keeping them in rhythm. Well, it's not music for the sake of music, it's even just for work. Certainly, if the music is for the sake of connecting to Hashem, then there's the permissibility, right? So the prohibition on music is music that's just for the sake of entertainment and joy. So when the Sanhedrin is there, the temple is there, and we're in Eretz Yisrael, and the air itself is in the service of Hashem, then any music is in that context. Any. Sure, because that's why it ended with the destruction of the Sanhedrin. When you're in that context, everything is part of the service of Hashem, including random music sitting with friends at a Beis Shemesh Tois, at a place to drink. But when you're away from the temple and you no longer have the Sanhedrin leadership, you have to be very careful. What music are you listening to? You can't just rely on the fact that the music exists out there is beautiful and good. You have to know what you're looking for. And therefore, just drinking and singing with frivolity, that's forbidden. And to that end, I want to share something with you. It's rather long. I don't want to read everything here. It's a full page. It's a response to the Piamenta brothers. You ever heard of the Piamenta brothers? Piamenta brothers is a band, or not a band, two brothers, Israeli boys. One played guitar, one played flute. You can Google them and listen to their music. And they are Balei Teshuvah. They did Teshuvah. So before they did Teshuvah, they were engaged in rock and roll music.
What's their name?
Piamenta. That's the name of the brothers, Yossi and Avi Piamenta. And they were very popular band in Israel, or they were part of a band. They're very popular in Israel. And they were rock and roll in the 60s and 70s, that rock and roll kind of culture. And they made Teshuvah. And they wanted to bring their music with them. They were hesitant, or maybe they got hesitancy and pushback from some of the Orthodox people. When you're bringing this kind of music into our culture, you're doing Teshuvah, leave it behind you. So they wrote to them asking what to do. Never gave them a whole guidance. And Rebbe, first of all, wants to make sure there's a number of points being made here. I went through them quickly. The first point that Rebbe says is, first of all, you got to make sure that the people who listen to you know that you're a new band, that you're no longer the band that used to be. Number one. You shouldn't assume it's just more of the same. It's not the same. You're now Orthodox Jews, and now your music represents something holy. So it's something new. That's number one. Number two, generally speaking, you're right. The pasuk says, in all your ways you should know God. All your ways you have to know God. So you're musically inclined, you got to know God in your music. There's the directional. It's got to be under the broad guise of you getting to know God through your music. So whatever talent God granted a person, it's to be used in getting to the pursuit of the knowledge of God, including your music. And therefore, generally speaking, you're right. And if you got to talk to professionals, make sure you're doing it rightly, and so on. And get guidance. Specifically, Deborah says, in the realm of music, where the current state of music is such, it captures hearts. You could make a living on this, and you already have the market. So certainly, if you're getting guided properly, that your music is in the service of Hashem, go for it. Now, when it comes to music, it's not just a question of secular versus Jewish, but the entire foundation of the music is such that it brings out in them the inclination, if we're speaking specifically of rock and roll, of breaking down boundaries and breaking down structure, including, Deborah says, unfortunately, the rules of modesty. That's what the music is designed to do, not just the words, but the whole music itself is meant to bring out in this person like this kind of self-expression, break down boundaries. Everything is good. Whatever I want, I do. And therefore, on the one hand, this actually means that your work is even more vital. If generally speaking, the kind of music you're playing, rock and roll, the message it sends is break down boundaries, do whatever you want, no modesty, everything goes, then your work to make rock and roll in a holy way becomes even more valuable to counter that. But on the other hand, it makes it more difficult because you have to battle the current state of how people think music is.
Yeah.
Right? So that you first of all, you have to avoid, there are educators, Jewish educators who are nervous about rock and roll and what the effect it's going to have on children. You have to demonstrate that your rock and roll is different.
Yeah.
Your rock and roll doesn't break down boundaries.
Right.
It's meant to increase joy in the service of Hashem.
Right? You want to ride in the audience.
That's right.
Hey, what is this?
And moreover, it goes on. You have to guarantee that your music is not going to be an entryway into the rest of that music genre, which is designed, everything's permissible, do whatever you want, right? And therefore, it requires diligence and care to make sure that the music you are playing is directional. And I think it's based on this Gemara, as we're going to learn, God willing, tomorrow. It's not per se the music is bad.
It's what it does.
It's what it does and where it's going. And the context, not just of the words being said, but certainly that, but even the music itself. Even the music itself. That's especially the music itself. That's not beyond words.
So just as a tangent, you have a bunch of a conflict, like Nissan Black.
Yeah.
He has maintained that rapper persona.
Yeah.
Is that permissible?
Presume, yeah. Under the guise of what they're describing here, I think the same thing would apply to him. If the messages he's relaying is stand up tall, gain control of your life, and serve Hashem better, then good. But if, as God forbid, many in the genre, the message is do whatever you want, dump all structure,
right,
then it's no good. So this is written, I'm not sure what year this is written. I'm not sure what year it's written. Actually, the year is it's 70. This is 73, 74. This letter.
That's like the heart of.
It's at the beginning when that shift started to happen. So the Piamentas were pioneers in this idea of redirecting what rock and roll and what music could be as a response because of this letter. So this letter, in many ways, is responsible for the direction that music has gone. The Piamentas paved the way for others who came after them to use their expression and talent in music to engender more service of Hashem, not less.
And then Eighth Day.
Sure, plenty of others. So I think that's what the Gemara means. As we'll see more tomorrow, that music directionless, destruction. Directional, the greatest blessing. It's very potent and thus can go both ways.
I guess we'll discuss this tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I don't see how that rule would change when the temple is restored or during temple times. I mean, why would you want non-directional music?
Okay, that's a good point. I don't think that you want non-directional music then, but I think that automatically, because we're in a place of divine revelation, all music in and of itself becomes directional.
Oh.
Because it's all within the context of serving Hashem.
Right.
But now that flow,
there may be no desire or flavor.
That's like what we were saying earlier. You knew if something was holy or unholy at the time.
Right.
But now, even holiness itself is packaged in such a way that you can't even tell what's what. So you have to really be careful about the direction that you're going with these spiritual powers, such as music, which is a very strong, soulful spiritual power.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, wonderful day, Eden.
Okay.